everybody, it's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. I did recently just get to Grandmasters. I'm slightly out of it now, but really on the cusps of getting there, and I did so playing solo and duo queue through my adventure through the small queues, playing with randoms in order to achieve my rank. I've noticed something that we might call the "we need an X fallacy," and that's something that I want to demystify a bit here today. Because the number one thing that I notice from queuing up and playing and talking with a lot of the community is that a lot of players' approach to the game effectively pans out like this. They learn one or two certain things, like Reinhardt is good, but then they apply that to every situation, despite what the enemy team is running, despite the team comp, despite how your team is performing, and they sort of bash their head against the wall with the assumptions of, we need this, we need a Reinhardt, we need two healers, we need to have multi-tank because it's so good, we need all this. And that simply isn't the case. When queuing, I've learned to kind of adjust to this and just pick the meta heroes if the team looks to be making a meta comp. But at the same time, that doesn't always work for a number of reasons. You may try to build the standard predetermined meta composition, but if your team can't play that strategy appropriately, if the right players aren't performing their jobs to the level that's required for it to work, you can't run it. Because like right now, Rein, D.Va, Roadhog, Ana, Lucio, Soldier is deemed the top of the meta comp. It works on a lot of different situations. But I feel like a lot of players don't realize that even pro teams flex out of this to adapt with the situations they're in. So I want to kind of translate the things that I've learned from watching the pros and adapting to what works in matchmaking, understanding the full context of how team comps work. Because sadly, it seems a lot of players' perspective is down a very narrow sightline, and a ton of assumptions are made about what can and can't work. And also, by the way, if you hadn't noticed, in this game where I'm playing D.Va, I'm matched up against Bromas, who's an amazing pro player. I try my best on D.Va, but she's not actually one of my better heroes. And over the course of the game, they just play a cleaner game of Overwatch than we do and overtake us, but it was a really good game. So let's get into it. I think the number one team comp misconception is when you lose a team fight to a bunch of ultimates. I think a lot of times when that happens, there's some frustration set in, a whole bunch of things got wrecked. And sometimes it isn't even just a big team wipe. It might be your star player, let's say like Roadhog or Soldier in the meta comp, getting picked off for one reason or another, getting hit by some ultimate, which completely unravels your team composition. And a lot of times this leads to players saying, we need to swap the X, Y, or Z. And a lot of times it isn't actually the comp whatsoever, but your execution. Comp can matter, but you have to set up your comp to play it in the proper way. So let me explain a few rules of thumb. I think as the game ages and the player base becomes more acquainted with how Overwatch can be played, and I mean that in sort of the horizontal styles of play approach, not just the how to play the standard meta comp approach, then players will be more familiar with the different options and approaches to the game. So let me start breaking down some of these for you. First and foremost, I think one of the strongest swaps possible in matchmaking is when things aren't working to consider flexing off your secondary healer into something that will specifically do a job that needs doing. Especially in the case where that secondary healer is like a Lucio or a Zen, and it doesn't feel like you're getting impact from the Zen discords, or, and this happens even more so in matchmaking, if you're not getting value out of the speed boost from Lucio. If the team just isn't coordinated enough to execute on the speed boost, you almost always will be just better off swapping to a different hero. I mean, it sounds silly, but in a lot of cases, playing single healer is amazingly powerful, and I didn't just make this up. Single healer is one of the strongest setups that Envious does. So try to think about everything in the trade-offs of how it will affect your comp and the changes you'll have to make in your playstyle. Sometimes it can feel impossible to play King of the Hill without Lucio, but if you don't have a Lucio, and they do, you have to assume that that means they're going to have all the relevant ground before you, and likely will have control of the point first. But if you have Zen Ana, you'll be slightly stronger in the damage and anti-tank department. So with that, the answer would be to slowly take control of the map and win the frag battle first, as your team is slightly weaker in retaking because you don't have the speed boost initiation to get in quickly. Because the truth of the matter is, if you're not playing in a full team, and the enemy team isn't playing in a full team, the coordination, even all the way up to Grandmasters, is so mediocre that you don't need a perfect comp. You don't need to assume that the comp has to be certain things. The only thing that needs to happen ever is to get kills, don't die. That's FREEDO's golden rule to matchmaking. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be getting the kills, but if you are supporting, tanking, healing, whatever, you have to be enabling other heroes on your team to get kills and don't die. And if you're getting killed and nothing's dying, I find it much easier to flex the comp towards being able to do something in a weighted way rather than just going down the center of assumed meta that we need 2 healers, we need all these tanks. X, Y, and Z heroes aren't playable because there's a lot of heroes that are in the Overwatch roster right now that are very difficult to beat without team coordination. And if you pick characters that can simply do a job rather than trying to focus on the team game too much, a lot of times you'll be better. I always go for the team comp first, and if it starts not to work, you have to kind of get creative with your approach to the game. Yes, Soldier's considered the best DPS right now. I understand that. He does a lot, and fits really good in the backline and is a nice stable character. But with that being said, I've had my most success on Reaper, and although D.Va's very popular and can chase me down and cancel a lot of my damage, the way I succeed with him is by playing him correctly. I don't just set up in the death ball and try to have a standard fight, Deathball versus Deathball, because the enemy Soldier, D.Va, Rein will always win that. Instead, I utilize Reaper in the Lurk and Pounce playstyle in order to do an assignment, which is to hunt down specific targets. Once Reaper's in position and in close range, he can insta-kill things through healing, so you don't have to even focus healers. I try to find the Soldier or Roadhog and pounce them and kill them very quickly. And in that way, I can play Reaper in the same way that you might consider like a Widow, who can get pickoffs. The difference is, Widow plays from a sightline at range, Reaper flanks around the map and hides in cheeky spots and pounces at a moment's notice. Even when it works, people are telling me to switch off Reaper. And I think it's this assumption that so many things are unplayable. The community seemingly has only learned how to play a death ball. The other day I was in a game like this, where this clearly was the case. We were pushing up Numbani up to that top left bit. We're all in that cute little death ball, which often happens, and they have a Symmetra in Mei. Meanwhile, we have a Genji flanking off to the left side, and our Zarya says, "Who's that off on their own? Why aren't you grouped up with us?" And after face-palming through my face, I kind of figured it out. If that player only knows how to play a death ball, they seemingly don't know the power of flanking and splitting and how to play that way. Playing in 3 or 4 tanks in a massive mess of Roadhog hooks and powerful healing is a viable way to play. But you also can split the map and take multiple angles, as I showed with the 3 DPS Widowmaker video. And that's kind of the key. You don't even need a Reinhardt if you have multiple DPS taking multiple angles. I played a really tough game on Ilios once, where we had a Sombra that would not swap, and honestly wasn't getting that much value out of her. I think some insane Sombras can do some work with her in a limited capacity, but it definitely wasn't happening for our Sombra. No impactful EMPs, and no real presence in the game. Now, the answer isn't to get mad at that Sombra and then try to build a meta comp with Sombra added in, because it just won't work. In that game, we increased the number of flankers we had, and even played tankless at one point. We ended up losing on the 5th map of Ilios, after having 99 somehow, but we got a lot closer than we did when we were trying to just run standard hero picks, or the assumed meta hero picks. All tanks do is set up an initiation. Reinhardt's amazing, he's very, very good. Stand behind the rectangle and you can challenge an angle. But keep in mind, it's a shooter game with cover and terrain and corners, things to hide, places to flank, cover spots, high ground, etc., etc. And if you play smart navigating through those aspects of the map, you can have the map quote-unquote tank for you. Because if you're playing Tracer, Reaper, Sombra, Pharah, or Genji, you don't necessarily need the tank to set up the duel for you. If you can creatively find the opening towards getting the duel you want, by playing smart with your positioning, you can win those individual battles that change the game. That's kind of what solo queue is about. That's what Get Kills Don't Die is about. Genji's wrecking you, go Winston, even if it puts you on single healer. I played a game on Anubis where we were playing up against a Mei and a Pharah on defense. Now, theoretically, that should not be a great comp. But what it is good against is a standard death ball that wants to push through the choke and get itself split off. But despite that being the case, a player on our team was convinced that Reinhardt is a must-pick at all times. Well, guess what? Mei walls off Reinhardt, and Pharah flies above him, so your big shield can do nothing to protect your squishy teammates as she ignores it and shoots past it. I mean, to be honest, guys, the scary thing about Overwatch is that there's way more to learn. We've spent so long explaining the game, and there's so much more. And it's kind of a beautiful thing in a way, but we have so much work to do. If you have 2 or 3 DPS picks, right now in the meta, I'm leaning towards a Zen even over an Ana. Ana's amazing right now, but she's amazing at setting up tank play. I think it's just as effective right now to have multiple DPS whether that's 2 or 3. And yeah, I know it seems weird for me to say 2 DPS is a big stretch nowadays, but you don't have to play in a death ball. You can spread out to find favorable duels and win them. It's sort of amazing to me that the entire community can just assume single DPS, 3 tanks, 2 healers is the way to go no matter what. As if that wasn't a strategy that was developed over time. Granted, in the current meta, after a bunch of buffs, it made it so good, but we can't just like throw out all the knowledge of how to play the game elsewhere. A lot more heroes are viable in this meta than people give them credit for. Pharah, for one. Add on a Mercy with that as well, as long as she gets res value and pockets the Pharah. I wouldn't play her in any other context, to be honest. Junkrat is highly underutilized. Gone are the days where you have to be afraid at giving Ana Nano. Yes, Nano's very good, but if they're playing 3 or 4 tanks, it's going to be hard for them to get that Nano where it needs to be. So the aerial denial of Junkrat spam is amazing right now. Now granted, the meta tank diva can chase you down, but another huge aspect of Overwatch that I think people forget, just like how Reaper's still viable despite the fact that diva exists, Junkrat's the same way, but your goal to beat diva is to cut her off from her healing source. The more spread out the Ana and the diva are, whether that means you're playing a Widow at range, Junkrat at range, or Reaper flanking and pouncing, spending most of the game waiting, but more or less hiding from the diva until it's time to fight and kill something quickly, that's how you beat the diva and take her out of the game. Granted, yes, you can run standard Death Bolt if you want, and just Roadhog hooker and anti-healer, and play the meta-determined style of playing. But if that's not working, you gotta have a fallback plan. You gotta be more creative with your style of play, because you might not be that good on some of the meta heroes. For instance, I'm not very good at Roadhog. I don't want to play Roadhog. I eventually have learned Soldier. My pro tip for him is to learn the 5-bullet burst and how to get that into a target's head. That's how you have the insane time to kills with Soldier. Otherwise, obviously, you can just spam Rhine shields for days. But the point is, it's always going to matter the play you put into your picks, not just the picks themselves. If you or your team can't perform the meta comp to win, don't put up these rules about the game of Overwatch that you can't climb over, otherwise you won't actually learn the game. There's been games where I've gone triple support, and I get laughed at, but we win. On King of the Hill, if you're trying on a Zen, but your team isn't playing in a way that's going to be able to take the map, they're just trying to death ball into an engagement without speed boost, that's terrible. The fact of the matter is, Zen is more DPS support than healing, and we had a 6 Zen. Zen probably could go Soldier instead, but what we needed was that speed boost to get us through the choke. This is how I win games and overcome these ways, because I don't put up these rules for myself and say, well, 2 supports were picked, so I definitely could never pick speed boost, even though that's exactly what the team needs. Now, maybe best case scenario, the extra support that you don't need swaps off, but the point of this commentary today is, look past the assumptions that you think people have told you about the game, that you've absorbed about the game, in order to see through to the solutions that win games. Know what your hero pool is. Know what you're capable of. There's no point to play a standard meta comp and just get rolled constantly, assuming there's nothing you can do to change about the situation. If somebody can go single healer for a Widow swap or a flanker swap in order to go make an impact into the team fight elsewhere where you're not getting it currently, is there a key target that's not going down on the enemy team that's carrying things? In the solo queue meta, it's far more important to eliminate the enemy team's carry than worrying about keeping your team comp in its most ideal state. Because there's no point to have this really well-balanced comp that's meta approved, but yet the enemy team's wrecking you. We have tons and tons of videos to make to help explain these things, but I wanted to make this video today to try to open the door towards this conversation. You don't need a certain amount of healers or tanks. What you need to do is solve the problem that the enemy team is facing you with. Sometimes these answers are really hard to see, but if you watch enough of our streams, I think I can be confident in saying that when I'm playing the game, I can figure this out more or less. Sometimes it's really hard, don't get me wrong. I had a guy pick Torb on attack on King's Row, and we are flabbergasted. How the heck do we win this? Well, if he's gonna set up a turret in our spawn, I guess, we'll just go multiple snipers and just play from afar and try to get picks until we kill enough of them to take the point. There's no point to try to build around a speeding in initiation comp if you're gonna have a Torb building a turret in your spawn. With the state of the balance of the game that it's in right now, there is very few picks that, if played well, make your games unwinnable. Now, if your teammate's picking a risky pick and not playing very well, then you might have to overcompensate for that. But the key to winning in those situations isn't going to be by trying to cram down one vision of the game onto a different player. Instead, a more strong approach to the game is to think, how do we facilitate the pieces we have? And when it doesn't work, it's time to try to take advantage of what the enemy team's doing, despite what it does to your team comp. And sometimes that means swapping your meta tank Reinhardt onto Tracer to go have an impact in their back line so that you can disrupt the formation in order to pull it apart and find openings elsewhere. Or any of the other examples that I explained explained in this video. Guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I know this is bound to be controversial, but if you think about it, none of the meta comps would have been developed if the pro players that created them had that approach to the game. The Ninjas in Pajamas comp would not exist if they just set up rules that we can't pick more than 2 tanks, guys. 2-2-2 is the way to go, which a lot of people still believe. And since matchmaking picks are all over the place anyway, with what the enemy team's gonna throw at you, it's much better to simplify your focus towards overcoming the thing directly in front of you, rather than trying to have a broad philosophy of the game that can set up rules that you don't need to follow, ever. The only rule is win the game. You don't have to play the game in one single way. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. It really does help us out. Subscribe for more. We upload each and every day. Check out our Twitch streams, link in the description, along with our Discord server, where you can meet up with other players in the Overwatch community, as well as find teammates on every platform at any skill rating. Also follow us on Twitter at YourOverwatchYT for stream announcements, updates, and cool clips that we get from playing the game. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.